It's 1 o'clock and we'll start our special meeting. And we're going to be talking about the core services for the district attorney's office and the juvenile services. And I'll let Will kick off or take it from there.
Commissioner Crawford. We are here for what should be our second to last group of departments for purposes of discussing core service descriptions. As you noted, today we're going to hear from the district attorney and the director for the juvenile department. Before we turn the microphone over to Carrie to discuss the district attorney, I'm just going to make a couple of comments about the purpose of this project we are working on. So core services in the public sector refer to fundamental and essential functions that a government department or agency provides to fulfill its mission and serve the community. These services are vital for ensuring public welfare, security, and the effective administration of governmental responsibilities. Typically, core services are going to include the primary functions critical to mission fulfillment. These types of activities or operations are the ones that enable the public sector entity to achieve its statutory objectives and policy goals. Core services also include legally mandated or required services, so functions that must be delivered in accordance with laws or regulations ensuring compliance with statutory requirements. They also include essential public goods and services, so activities that provide basic needs and support community well-being, reflecting societal values and expectations. And they also ensure operational sustainability. So this would include services that ensure the continuity and long-term viability of governmental operations, requiring a stable and predictable funding. Core services have several key characteristics. They're centrally aligned with mission and community needs, but otherwise they directly connect to the agency's core purpose and public responsibilities. Another characteristic is that they are subject to public expectation and demand. This means they often reflect what constitutes what constituents view as non-negotiable government offerings based on community engagement and historical service levels. Another characteristic is that they are prioritized in strategic and financial planning. So core service descriptions can help focus budget allocations and resource management to protect, maintain, and enhance essential functions. And the last characteristic is that they are often the foundation of public trust and accountability. By delivering these services effectively, we build public confidence in our operations and promote accountability. So I know you guys have heard this description several times as we've been working through the core service descriptions. I like to do it in case we have any new attendees who are observing this meeting or watch it later so that they understand the importance of this project we're working on in terms of trying to define core services for each department. So I appreciate your patience while I go through that one more time. But with that, I will turn it over to Carrie to discuss the district attorney's core service description.
Do I have to get really close or does it pick up? Good afternoon. I assume you can all hear me okay. So I'm Carrie Hawthorne. I am the Crook County District Attorney. I think what we do is clear because I've been doing it for so long. And then when I talk to the public, I realize that a lot of the nuances of what we do probably more mysterious to people and confusing to people than what I think. So if you have questions about things, stop me and interrupt and ask. Happy to answer. So our mission statement is I've developed and modified the prior DA's mission statement a little bit, just in the sense that it was very, very long. I think it's important to have a short, concise mission statement that encompasses the work that we do. There are many, many things that we consider when we are doing our work. Our job is controlled a lot by both statutes, case law from the Oregon Supreme Court, the Oregon Court of Appeals, our local judges, as well as impact from our community in the sense that they serve as jurors on our trials. So there's a lot of things that we take into account, including investigations and what can we prove. There's ethical obligations that apply to every prosecutor, as well as the legal standards that we're taking into account. So our mission is to seek justice, promote community safety, and uphold the law. We do that vigorously and impartially. We pursue this mission with fairness, integrity, and honor, and in a manner to promote public trust in the criminal justice system and serve our community. Sometimes we don't have a ton of media focused on Crook County justice system. Deschutes County has a lot more of the direct media reporting on their cases. I will say that even when we have media attention on a particular case or a situation, where that becomes really important for us is that we are still treating all sides of that case impartially, consistently, within the scope of the law, and making sure that the people involved in the system believe in it. If people lose faith in the system or feel like they're not being treated fairly, they don't feel like they have access to the justice system. So we handle a lot of different things. We typically, well, generally our primary role is going to be prosecuting criminal offenses, adult and juvenile criminal offenses. We have other avenues of things that we handle, including civil commitments. When that's not a crime, when someone is danger to self or others, our county designated mental health provider may place a hold on that person and institute civil commitment proceedings. My office handles that those civil commitments. Other counties, different, like county legal may handle those. Oftentimes those cases overlap. Not always, but sometimes those overlap with other law enforcement related things. It's just made sense here for us to handle those. We work closely with law enforcement, grand jury. DA is responsible for all unattended death investigations. All child fatalities have to have a child fatality review. End of the month, we actually have 3, unfortunately, where we bring in various community partners and look at what happened. Were there things that could have prevented or been implemented to avoid that? What can be done better? Those kinds of things. And then you all know, I've talked about some of our some of my other designated duties, like public records request appeals, things like that. So criminal prosecution, mostly when I talk about this, I'm referring to adult crimes. I'll let Erica talk more about the juvenile. The juvenile process is a little bit different in how we receive that information and how that process works. But typically, we're going to review police reports. Very often, we actually are working with law enforcement, especially on major cases, early on for the investigation. Review those. We're keeping in mind when we're reviewing cases, the legal implications. Is our evidence going to be admissible or not? Has it been collected in an admissible way? Work with law enforcement and obtaining search warrants if needed. And then making filing decisions. Felonies, then we'll go to grand jury. We have a grand jury coordinator. The grand jury is called in out of a local pool. They serve for a 2-month term. But they are, other than the initial orientation by the court, they then work through my office where we coordinate them, meaning tell them dates and times to come in, present felony cases to the grand jury. It's statutorily driven of what the rules are and what the admissibility of evidence is for grand jury purposes. We guide them with their legal advisor for that. And then grand jury ultimately makes a decision on felony cases.
This is an office, but it's not an office. Do they get paid for grand jury duty?
I think the first, kind of, not
I mean,
really.
it's kind of like a jury thing, but
It's
I mean, it's
through the
nominal.
state. Yes, it's nominal. The first there's a graduated payment for how many days of how long you've been held
Sure.
to serve. So I think it's $10 per service day for the first week, might be 2 weeks, and then I think it might go up to 20. But yes, they do. They can designate it to go back into like they don't want to take payment, so it goes back into the coffers, so to speak. Then they in all that payment, so my coordinator doesn't process that payment and it doesn't come out of our budget. It's paid through
The
the
state.
state, yeah, through the court system, through their coordinator. Otherwise, we are responsible for like, do they need a letter to their work saying that they're on jury service, things like that. That we do. We coordinate with that.
Thanks, I know that was just curiosity.
They don't get paid very much.
Yeah, but I just wondered, I was thinking
yes.
about jury does, so why wouldn't?
Yes, that is the same, same process. I think grand jurors often find that it's actually a very interesting process. Most people think that what we do is much like what you see on TV, and it's not. It also gives them an insight. I think a lot of the public doesn't actually really realize the ins and outs of what happens in the community. And so that's, I think, very eye-opening for people. The appellate process after a case is done, very often I am thinking about as we're prosecuting a case, what happens to this case after conviction. Appellate, if cases are upon conviction are appealed, which almost all of them are, that's actually handled by the Department of Justice, the appellate unit, where some of the civil proceedings we're involved in is called post-conviction relief. So aside from an appeal through our Court of Appeal system, defendants can file a post-conviction relief. If a defendant is out of custody, so not in prison, my office handles those post-conviction relief, and those are very civil case. The civil rules apply. It's oftentimes things like my attorney didn't do this or my attorney wasn't effective, challenges like that. So those can come up well after. I currently have one that is still lingering on from that I'm peripherally involved in from a 2016 case. Not supposed to go on that long, but they can go on that long. And then if that's granted, so a judge says, yes, I'm granting the post-conviction relief, conviction overturned, we end up trying to review that case and having to retry it sometimes a decade later or more. So that's those are some of the challenges of that, we are always keeping in mind of the integrity of the convictions. Yeah. Our victims assistance, I've talked a lot about that, particularly as we were working on the VOCA grant. It's primarily grant funded. Our victims assistance program really is that first line of communication to victims in cases. Our attorneys it would be ideal if we could meet with every victim in every case. That's just not the reality of what we face with our caseloads. So they do a lot of the day-to-day sitting with victims throughout court, advising them the future court date, advising them of plea offers, things like that. So our victims assistance program works with all victims. Some offices throughout the state, due to staffing, they only provide victims assistance services on cases where the victim's constitutional rights apply, such as violent felonies. So not all offices are able to provide those services. I already touched on this. We work with law enforcement. We work closely with some of the challenges, obviously, is when you have every time you have new people start in a career, there's a learning curve to it. And so having over the last few years of having so much turnover and not retaining law enforcement, not retaining prosecutors, that just adds a layer of complication and challenges as people learn. Having experienced people is really important. We've been really working with kind of collaborating with tri-counties, our major incident team, OSP, and crime doesn't stay just in one county. It tends to cross the county lines. Our tri-county agencies work very well together. And so We spend a lot of time working with law enforcement. We work just as hard to, and our law enforcement works just as hard to prove a case as we do to clear a person, right? Because ultimately, the most important thing is that we're getting it right and that we are achieving the truth and looking for what really occurred. We work very often, very closely with law enforcement. It is nice now. I actually have two of my other attorneys who are on call, so it's not just me 24/7. So that's lovely to be able to spread the wealth a little bit. So juvenile system, that I'm gonna let Erica talk a little bit more about that. We as we handle juvenile cases, but we probably more assist juvenile cases. Tend to first go to the juvenile department. They will review those cases. They may do an outside, so all the programs, when Erica talks about them that are outside the court system, we're not involved in those. And so they will do an initial assessment review. That youth may be placed into some sort of like formal accountability agreement or some sort of outside of court diversion-esque program, for the lack of a better word. We aren't involved in those at all. When a case gets filed into the court, we will review and give them the charging language of what are the elements of this crime. Here's what the charge needs to say. Here's what charges fit this case. And then they file that paperwork. Juvenile cases are driven a lot more through the juvenile department. We attend court and assist when they're in court, but otherwise we're not directly involved in those. Child support doesn't involve the juvenile department, obviously. We assist with enforcing child support orders, collecting overdue obligations. That system has changed, unfortunately, I'm not great with timelines, but I think probably about a year ago, the court signed my office up without consulting with us with a remote child support enforcement program. To my understanding is their tracking of success is not based upon how many child support orders are actually enforced or how much recovery they're getting for the parents who are owed back due child support. That process has been very clunky. It is not run very smoothly. It's taken it out of local judicial enforcement and has placed a judge or an ALJ in charge of that. And it's been very problematic, and I would not call that successful. So I'm looking at potentially in the future, hopefully bringing that back more to local accountability and with our local judges. I think that the reason it was taken out of local control, that's not the right word, but moved to remote was because of court docketing. But it's not been a very fluid process, and I don't think it's been beneficial to our local families who are in need of that assistance. Slide. So we continue to try to maintain manageable caseload as we get people up to speed. That's been helpful. Obviously, some cases take a lot more time. I've spent the last month really dealing with two significant cases. One was a homicide trial that was supposed to go, was set over at the last minute. That was a significant quantity of work, over 9,000 pages of discovery, thousands of hours of videos. Should say hundreds of hours of videos. And then a pretty significant sex abuse trial the week before, the beginning week of January. So sometimes those caseloads, even though it seems like it's not as big, you can't necessarily compare like just a number. So trying to make sure that people are doing the work that that they're good at, that satisfies them, that their caseload is manageable, so that they can provide the service that they need to be providing. We continue to participate in specialty court. Right now we have drug court, which they call recovery court, mental health court, which is called wellness court. I am exploring if we have an ability to expand wellness court to include like a veterans court and how that would work. And what services would be incorporated in that. We continue to focus on making sure that we're providing service to our victims. Compliance rates in child support enforcement cases, and working on like how is that data being tracked with this remote support, child support court program, and is it really successful? If they're not going to track success as being defined as getting child support orders enforced, I'm not sure what the point is. So we'll continue to track that and push on that avenue as needed. And the goal obviously is some stability and continue to build. We're building a really good team in my office. And I think it's a benefit to the community to reduce turnover. We obviously work with our local law enforcement, crime lab, all of that. There are times we work with state and federal law enforcement agencies, not a lot. Oh, I should say not a lot for federal. Some, some of our drug cases are significant enough that they may go federal, or if they're transporting across state. We work closely with the juvenile department. DHS is part of our child abuse multidisciplinary team, as well as other agencies. Best Care is our designated treatment provider. They have a new, I think it's CEO is her title. And she's been making her rounds, I think, meeting with people and implementing some better communication strategies. That we're still working on how are the last year's legislative changes going to impact our community. I think there's some good and some not great in it. In that some of our lower level offenses, until they commit a more serious offense, we can't get them to inpatient mental health services, things like that. Work with closely with the court, as well as with other victims assistance programs. And I don't remember what this slide was getting at. So
Challenges, maybe?
challenges, that could have been it. I don't think. So obviously we don't really control criminal activity. So some of the things that we deal with are when crime increases, we deal with it. You can't always predict. It is Friday the 13th, so we're gonna knock on wood and hope we get through the weekend. We're responsible for, if a case goes to trial, we need to try it, and I can't always predict those things and the expenses associated with those. We try to keep in mind do we have grant funding available to help assist with trial necessary resources, things like that. We are seeing the impact on civil commitment, mental health crisis, / drug use. Not all crossover, a lot do crossover. The increased expungement requests, I have been utilizing our contract attorney for assistance with processing those. Those are a lot. And then funding for our victim services, the VOCA grant was at risk this year, came through at the last minute, but that's been kind of an ongoing challenge. The technology, that probably is one of our more ebbing and flowing. I learned kind of after we were partway down the law enforcement body camera. I didn't know that their body cameras were outdated and had to be replaced, and they replaced it with it's the company that everyone throughout the state is utilizing, but that then we receive all of that data and that information. Storage isn't free. So, the system, so we ended up having to implement, not having to, but we ended up implementing the evidence.com system because the quantity of data storage and video storage as laws changed and require additional law enforcement to record and mandating more recordings. Our digital storage was increasing exponentially. So some of that kind of software system stuff and things that we don't have a lot of control over has been both a challenge as well as a requirement to kind of pivot and to make the best choice that we can in the most frugal way that we can. So is that the last slide?
Yeah.
Questions?
I went to the sheriff's meeting last night in Pell Butte.
Yeah.
And they did a very good job. But one of the things that the people were frustrated about is the new law where if you don't get assigned legal
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
then it goes away. And of course, John and Bill said that hasn't happened here in Crook County, but
Yeah.
it's going to because it's going to overflow. And that just seems terrible to me.
And I brought this up a little bit at County College. I think that the public, and there's not a lot of transparency on, OPDC is the Oregon Public Defense Commission, and they manage the funding. They have a fairly significant budget, and one of the frustrations that I have personally experienced, and I know other DAs who have gone through this, the public defense issues previously in assigning attorneys, one of the biggest frustrations has been the lack of transparency by OPDC. So just kind of roughly, my understanding of how they're managing it is that they assign attorneys what they call a maximum attorney case count or caseload or something like that. What that MAC is, I've never been able to get an answer on. And so I do know that throughout the state, as other DA offices have looked at it, the answers for it and how many, accurate data tracking has been an issue. Accountability for how they're assigning that and where this arbitrary number is coming from has not really, in my opinion, been vetted or defensible. They've had a lot of money thrown towards that agency to solve the problem. A lot of the solutions that are still being proposed are things that don't necessarily actually get at the root of the problem. And there's not been a lot of communication from OPDC certainly to my office at all. But even to our local defense consortia, they've not been real clear about what is the MAC. You have people who the numbers aren't based upon are they able to take on more cases or not. They just assigned an arbitrary number, and it's not are you capable of taking on more cases. They've just arbitrarily have decided you can't. My understanding is they wait, like cases aren't assigned a weight or you have one case, so that means you have one case. They weight it, so this one case counts as 3 cases. If you're removed from that case or that case is dismissed a week later, that doesn't always necessarily remove from your MAC. So there's a lot of, what happens if a case is on bench warrant and you're not working the case? There's not necessarily consistency in that. And it's frustrating because it's not accountable to the taxpayers. It's not accountable to defendants who deserve to not have their cases languish. It's not accountable to victims who, there's no consideration towards them. And it's really wasteful to the taxpayers. And so there needs to be better answers. I don't know that we're necessarily out of the woods. My understanding is is that there's this kind of number of cases. When we started experiencing the issue last year was towards the end of their contract time period. The issue went away because their case counts cleared when they started a new contract period. So I don't have confidence that we're not going to face the issue again. And really it allows if it had been that defendants were released. So we had some very dangerous people, like an attempted burglary armed with a knife while highly impaired, was released from custody because there wasn't an attorney appointed back into our community. So, we were working diligently to try to get somebody appointed and work with, our counterparts who are trying to work with OPDC, but ultimately the community is held really at their decision to appoint or not appoint. And there's got to be a better answer than just we're not appointing, so these cases just can't proceed. I took into account when we were experiencing that, if we had a probation violation, if a defendant was on probation and committed a new crime, maybe we don't file the PV so they don't get two separate cases, case counts for the exact same work on the underlying case. Like, what is our end goal and how can we help identify that, to try to make sure that we're not stalling the system? Ultimately, though, OPDC is paid a significant amount of money to provide a service, and they need to be providing that service and not just saying, well, the cases get dismissed if we just don't do our work.
Well,
So
more importantly, who gets to decide that? It's not the local, that should be, I mean, I don't know how
it's
you
not
work that,
local.
but it should be the district attorney that gets to decide, if there's a major case, then we are not on, we're gonna get rid of a DUI and we're gonna take a murder.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah, I mean,
local.
that seems
And it's
ridiculous.
not even our local defense attorneys who get to decide if they are able to take on a case or not. Historically, like the consortia attorneys, years ago, when I was a younger prosecutor, the attorneys were paid they took on, X amount of cases. If they took on more than that contracted amount at the end of the year, they were paid accordingly for those additional cases. They changed that structure, because they didn't agree philosophically with the previous structure. So I have said before, our local attorneys are paid. My attorneys have left my office to go work for our local public defense. They work hard. Their work is important. But when they themselves don't understand why they can take cases or assign cases and what their numbers are at and what things mean, that's real problematic that OPDC is not communicating that information. And for the service they've signed up for, there should be more accountability and transparency. We should know what those numbers are. So we don't currently have that issue. I am not comfortable that we're not going to have it again. So
Any more questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Carrie.
thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie. Next up, we have Erica Fricky from the Juvenile Department.
Afternoon. I'm Erica Fricky, I'm the director of the juvenile department here in so, when Carrie opened up talking about, people are confused about what they do in their office, I had to smile because I feel like we're sort of in that same boat. I think people know the juvenile department is out there, but what we really do, no one really knows. And we have certain statutes in place to protect juveniles, right? So a lot of times people want to know a lot more information than we're able to give. So we kind of work in this mysterious bubble. And that can be frustrating sometimes to the community when they just want to know kind of the facts and what's happening. And we can't really give that information to them like we can in the adult world. So my mission and core purpose is up there. So I'll just read them. Our mission is to protect the community by holding youth accountable for their actions in a fair and consistent manner, while providing resources and opportunities that promote positive change. The department delivers timely and effective responses, supports youth and families, encourages personal responsibility, promotes victim restoration, and provides culturally competent services that respect and celebrate diversity. One of the little statements in there that sometimes becomes an issue is that swift response. As we've talked about in the past, sometimes it is a little bit difficult to get docket time, and it just depends on what is going on in the courtroom and how many crimes the district attorney's office is prosecuting. And so one of the things we've worked on as far as developing diversion is because of the fact that when you have a young person who commits a crime and they they commit a crime in the middle of summer and they get the citation and we go ahead and get the, we bring them in, we do an intake, we file the paperwork at the court office. They may not see the resolution of their case for another 6 to 8 to 9 months. And so by that time, if they're on a conditional release, we've already worked with that youth for close to a year. And so helping them understand that this is actually now you're adjudicated on this crime. Now your probation starts, because they've worked with us for the last 9 months on a conditional release out of the court system, but their date has been set out, or their attorneys aren't, they have to work their attorney closer, or there's just reasons why that finality is not done right away. And so one of the things to help combat that we've sort of tried to develop lots of diversion opportunities for youth, because as we know, developmentally, they kind of need those swift responses. They need to have like, this is my action and this is my consequence. And so when you are prolonging that for 8, 9, 10, 12 months on some of these cases, it kind of loses its impact on them and kind of what their consequences, and it kind of gives them a sour taste of like, I've already done all this work, and it's they get that feeling of, I'm sort of getting picked on by the system, and we don't want that to be their view as they move forward into adulthood. So the purpose of our mission is to protect the community by providing fair, developmentally appropriate responses to justice-involved youth through intake, supervision, and case management. The department promotes accountability, supports victims, engages families, collaborates with community partners, and connects youth to culturally responsive services that reduce recidivism and support positive outcomes. So this is kind of the process that it goes through. I know Carrie had talked about it. It's a little bit different in juvenile world. When a youth commits a crime, or there's some sort of violation that the juvenile department is contacted about, initially, the very initial call from law enforcement is we immediately just assess, is the community at risk? Is that youth at risk? Is their safety at risk? Is the safety of the community at risk? Is their family at risk? Is the youth at risk? That question is what determines whether or not that youth gets detained and goes to detention. And we use the word jail in juvenile, but detention is jail, virtually on the adult side. If that question is no, there's no one at immediate risk, then that youth, we receive that referral, we go through that referral, we look at it and say, hey, this charging, the police charge them with whatever this crime is. We think that there could be more crimes, or we possibly are questioning whether or not that crime will stand if it has to go to court. And so we'll defer to the district attorney's office. They'll get that police report and say, this is what I would charge if this case has to go to court. This is what we feel we could prosecute in a courtroom. And during that time, we send all of our families an intake packet, which sort of talks to them about their past behaviors, their families' past involvement with the juvenile justice system or with the court system, any kind of traumas that they've had that might, any kind of learning disabilities. It's a very complete sort of, how do they have friends? Do their friends engage in unlawful behavior? And so families fill that out. They send that back to us. We do what's called a JCP, a juvenile crime prevention risk assessment, which kind of sort of helps us indicate whether there are risks to reoffend in the community. And we take all of that information and we look at, has that youth been in our department before? Have they not been in our department before? And we make a decision. Is this youth eligible for diversion? Can this youth be handled outside the court system? Or do we need to take this youth to court because their risk factors are too high and the community's at risk? That's what when it says conducts investigations, that's more of what that means. And going through that, so the other piece of that is that we want to make sure that every youth, we're addressing the specific needs of each individual youth. So we're not just throwing a blanket case management style to every youth. We want to make sure that if this youth has the issue of substance use, that we're addressing that. If it's truancy, if it's school relations, we're handling that. So we really take that to really make sure that we're doing a fair analysis of what this youth might need in order to be successful. Once a youth is placed on supervision, court supervised supervision, that those case managers really have to look at, are they following through with their court ordered conditions? That's really what drives us, right? Like the court has stated, you have these, you need to comply with these, and are you complying with those? And how can we remove barriers so that you can comply? How can we make sure you're doing what you need to do, so that they don't have to go back in front of the court? When a kid's on informal, it's virtually the same. But those youth that are placed on a formal accountability agreement, those youth that we keep out of the court system, when those youth are not complying with what we've asked them to do, that process looks a little bit longer. And so we can, and that's why it goes back to where we have to work so closely with our district attorney's office, because we can say, hey, you're not doing what we've asked, you're not doing what we've asked you to do. You were submitting dirty UAs, you're not going to school, whatever the case might be. And we then can revoke that formal accountability, revoke that diversion, and send them through the formal court process. We talk about making sure that each plan is individualized for each family, and that we are assessing youth so that we know what kind of supervision we need to give them. Are we needing to see them multiple times a week? Are we need to see them one time a week? We need to see them once a month. What does that look like? What is their risk? And how can we keep them safe in the community? So detention, when youth go to detention, the clock starts ticking, and we are pressured by statute and by the judges to get those youth out of detention and into a less restrictive environment. So my people work very hard at finding resources, finding respite care for those youth, finding programs for those youth, whether that's a detention-based program or a substance use program or a behavior program. So when a youth goes to detention and they have a court hearing, they have to have a court hearing within 36 hours of being placed in detention. And after that, we have to revisit that situation every 10 days. And in that 10 days, the judge is going to ask, where have you looked? Is there a possibility this kid could be removed? Is there a less restrictive opportunity somewhere else? And so my people have to work hard at finding places for kids to be. We do lack resources here in this side of the mountain. And unfortunately, some of our youth have to be placed in our neighboring counties when we don't have a family resource for them to go to. And some kids just aren't appropriate for detention programs. And a detention program is such that you have to have a class A misdemeanor or felony. And we have youth that are committing crimes, and they're beyond their parental control. However, they just don't quite fit that detention program model. And so we have to start figuring out other places for them to look. So we have to coordinate with family and partners to get them released.
So just on that basis, I know, they know that I went on the tour with you, and I think that we need something here in Prineville.
Yes.
And I don't want to do any privacy, but you have one right now who is placed in Redmond at Canal House, which is what we would like to model after. And you have one, you have no place. Could you kind of talk about them? What has gotten that, like the one to Canal? And
yeah, so it goes back to what Carrie said. I think, most of the public would be surprised at some of the situations that we encounter in our office. And a lot of times when youth get to the age of 15, 16, 17, families are fatigued. If this youth has had chronic behavior or chronic criminal behavior, that has caused disruption in their family, families are fatigued. And a lot of times, some of the family members don't have the skills to do their own involvement with the justice system or their own involvement with mental health. And what happens is there's a divide, and parents really feel like they can't care for them at home. And they will go into court and they will say, I don't want my youth home. I don't want my kiddo home with me. I don't want this youth in my house. And grandmothers and grandfathers can't take them for whatever reason. And so you have a youth who then sometimes spends extra time in detention because we're looking for a placement for them that's least restrictive. Sometimes, like for example, the youth we have currently in an outside placement, we get a phone call. Our office will receive a phone call daily whether it be from the school or the family members or the community, in regards to, that youth behavior, why they can't maintain wherever they are placed. And so we really do have to find a place that's stable for them and safe for them. And when we remove those, and in fact, both youth that I'm speaking of are both placed. One is, we actually placed one out of state, and one locally. Both of those youth are doing extremely well. Because when you remove the chaos and you remove that from their life, and you give them consistency and you give them sort of boundaries and consistent response, they tend to flourish. And developmentally, we know that about kids. And so that we have lacked a place for those youth to be that are in our community, and those youth that are placed outside of our community, they have to travel long distances on buses, right? Buses pick them up at sometimes 5:30 in the morning to get them here for school. They have to travel the same amount of time to get home. They're not with their friends, they're not with their peer groups, they're not with everything that they know, because really Crook County does an excellent job of supporting our youth. It's that out of home placement that we're really lacking.
I've been, ever since you brought this up, I've been talking to people in the community and kind of laying that out because, a lot of people are not on board with unsupervised or low to no barrier locations. But when I really lay out kind of the plan and putting them in a situation, if they're not going to school, if they get caught doing drugs or those things, they're held accountable. And there's been a really positive feedback from the people I've talked to.
Yes, I mean, a lot of these programs in a program, in an ideal world, you would have juvenile department involvement in a home, such, in one of those spaces, because really you want that consistent person, and you want them to know, they're going to get UA. There's going to be people checking in on their behavior. There's rules and there's consequences for breaking those rules. And a lot of times this youth that we're talking about, they don't have that in their day-to-day life. They've not ever had sort of a consistent accountability. And so what that looks like is they're blowing out of school, they're blowing out of their home, they're blowing out of community placements, they're putting the community at risk just due to the fact that they've never been sort of able to have a place where they feel safe and consistently cared for.
Right?
Well, remember the gal, they said that they kicked her out, that she wouldn't follow the rules, and the next day she was back begging to come back.
Begging to come back.
Yeah,
And a lot of
begging to
times,
come back.
what we find when we've placed youth outside of our community is that our youth do very, very, very well in programs. They do extremely well. It is very rare that we have a youth that does not do well in a program, whether that be a detention program or a community program. And that even goes for youth that we commit to the Oregon Youth Authority, which is youth that we can't contain in our community. A majority of the time, almost all of the time, those youth really do well in placements outside their home. And I think that's just due to, like I said, going back to that consistent care and those consistent boundaries that they need in order to meet expectations. If there aren't consistent boundaries and there aren't, consistent care, and the boundaries all over the place, they don't know what their expectations are, and they'll just make them up themselves. So
Thank you, Erica. I diverted you off your
no,
goals.
that's okay. So we do have a prevention program. We are one of the only juvenile departments in the state that still offer prevention programs. I think it is the cornerstone of our office, in that we are able to take youth in that just need what I was just talking about, that consistency, that person to come in and help family before it's, I don't want the word too late, but before they're involved in the court system, we're able to work with families and sort of take that burden off mom and dad who may be fatigued, or grandma and grandpa, or aunt, uncle, whoever the youth is living with, and provide them with some interventions, provide them with removing barriers as far as getting to school. We provide youth with rides. We provide youth, with, we make appointments for them at their mental health, at their substance use. We get them to and from those appointments. We really just help parents schedule and look at what the youth needs and what it can look like if they just reach out and ask community partners for help. Sometimes our families are resistant to to asking for help from the system. They've had negative experiences, or they just, that isn't what they're willing to do. But once we get them in our office and we just show that we're just trying to remove barriers and we're just trying to help your kid get what, whatever we need, and take the burden off, help you share the burden as far as you not always being the bad guy. Let us be the bad guy while we help give you some other skills so that when we walk away, you guys are able to function as a family. So prevention is something that we do in this community that is by far, for me, my biggest passion. We have kept truly a lot. I mean, it's really hard to show statistics on this because how would you really, going back to what Carrie said, we don't know how to predict crime or who's going to commit a crime. But the amount of youth that have come into our office simply just for truancy, parents can't get their kids, out of bed to go to school. And we've turned that around or helped turn that around and given parents back the skills to say, no, I am going to make sure you go to school. And this is how I'm going to get you to school. The amount of kids that we don't see again, I mean, that number, like I said, we can't really put a number on that, but I think it's substantial. We do use the victims advocate in the PA's office, who does all of our services. However, when we do have kids that are involved in diversion, we do send out letters and make sure that those victims are being notified when a youth is off probation or a youth case is terminated or whatever it might be. We've also implemented the restitution program, which I've talked about in a couple of different meetings, but a opportunity for youth to pay back their crime, pay back for their crime, and pay their victims. In times in the past, I've been at the juvenile department for a little over 20 years on and off. We haven't had the ability to give those kids an opportunity to pay back their victims. And so, they carry that restitution bill, for their whole life. And victims don't ever see that money, or they see very little of it. So we have really made an impact, I think, with our youth and with victims who need who want their restitution and they have a right to get their restitution. We've been working very hard on letters of responsibility. Sometimes when the court doesn't order a letter, which is an apology letter for an older term, but we work on letters of accountability, even if they're not court ordered, because sometimes a lot of youth can't reflect about how that might have bothered their victim. And so really talking about empathy and putting themselves in other people's shoes and, trying to develop some of those skills. So we work hard on our victim awareness for and it just what we've talked about before, we really encourage family involvement. We constantly have parents in. We're trying to coach parents on how to set boundaries and how to set rules. And I think a lot of times parents are grateful just for to be validated that, you know what I mean, that my kid is struggling and this is hard. And sometimes they just need to hear from you. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But this is, I promise at the end of the day, this is what our goal is. And I think just having a partner in that has helped families feel supported in our community. We talked about the timeliness of intake and assessments. We really try to do that as quickly as possible, just so the impact is real for our offenders. When we talk about recidivism, I also want to put in there that part of that number should be the amount of cases that don't proceed or progress to or escalate to Oregon Youth Authority. I think in 2024, I think 93% of our cases didn't proceed to OIA commitment. And that really speaks to the amount of work my people are doing in the office. Going back to what Carrie said, when we take a case on, when somebody in my office takes the case on, they really take on the case from start to finish. And it is all the aspects of that family and that kid and that youth. So when we go to court, my people stand up in court and give all of the information. They give the court reports. The judges in the district attorney's office depend on them to know the youth, know what's happening with the youth, and want the information about what we've done, what the youth has done. We and really they need to know their kids inside and out, because a lot of those questions are directed at them, without preparation. So you really have to know where your kid is and what they're doing, and where the family is. And talk about the partnerships, and that's just to name a few. I would say that most of the case management is calling and working with all of the community partners to make sure that they're getting the services that they need, and that are individualized for them. Because obviously, as we know, not every person and not every kid needs the same services. Primarily funded out of the general fund. We do get a couple grants from the Oregon Youth Authority and Department of Education. The restitution program that I've talked about in the past, that comes from the Oregon Youth Authority. That is basically a grant that supports de-escalation and to keep kids out of the Oregon Youth Authority. So we do psychological reports with that. We do youth incentives, family incentives. We do gas cards because we are placing so many youth outside of our community. We are able to now provide gas cards so that families can be visiting their youth while they're out, and they can participate in family counseling, and they can participate in all of the reviews that youth have while they're in a placement, and they can participate in any kind of youth planning or discharge planning. That has really made a huge difference, because when we would send a youth to Josephine County, for example, for 30 days or 90 days, really that the parent wouldn't see they could see their kid maybe over Zoom if that was a possibility, but really that was 3 months that they were not connected with their family. So now that we use OIA funds to provide gas vouchers, those families are able to go down and kind of make a family trip of it, show that we're making effort, like what do we need to work on while the youth is contained in a facility or contained in a treatment program, so that if behaviors stem from those visits, they're able to be handled versus just them coming home and having a parent not have seen their kid for 90 days and trying to start from square one again. The considerations that could impact our services and budget pretty immensely is detention states and locations. I've talked about before, and I think my community partners have been pretty open about Deschutes County and Norcor are the two detention facilities we use. They are both in a situation where they're assessing financially whether or not keeping their facilities open is something that's beneficial to their community. And so if those two were to close, we would have to place our youth in detentions in other places of the state. We pay $208, I believe, a night for Norcor. Yamhill County, which is one we could potentially use. Donald D. Long, which is in Multnomah County, we could use. Both of those stays are upwards of $400 a night. So it could impact our budget pretty significantly if we have to use another detention facility, if our two close. So we are looking at ways we can support those two detention facilities, and what does that look like? Does it look like we pay a certain amount for the year, and then we just contract with them and we use those beds as accordingly? Some of those discussions are happening. It's nothing concrete yet, but more to come on that. But that is something that could significantly impact our budget. Another would be if there was a loss of life or any type of Measure 11 type crime that we had to do for a long period of time. Obviously, that would impact the budget. And then those grant funded programs, if something were to happen and we weren't getting the funding, we'd have to do that way. Services that we're providing now. Like I got off track a little bit, but
No, great job.
you guys,
Yeah.
like we're on repeat. We've had this meeting a couple different times, different titles. So
I will say this, Erica, you must be a good leader, because when I spent the day with you, you guys are a team, and you're actually more than a team, you're a family, and you're all working for the kids. And I really admire that, and I really appreciate what you're doing.
And I appreciate that. We work really hard to work. I mean, my people have hard jobs, and so we work really hard on supporting each other and making sure that if somebody has to be out, another person can fill in their space, and just sort of, my team works really, really well together. And they really know each other. which is another thing I think, promoting them, just knowing who they are individually and knowing who they are personally. I'm obviously not oversharing your personal stuff in the office, but truly, I think it's helped to develop that family feel of, it's, you have to look each other in the face and you're all sort of, even though you have different caseloads, we're all managing, if one person's caseload is on fire, the rest of us really need to step in and help, because what happens there affects everybody else in the office.
And I think the way you guys work together also helps the kids because they see that family and and they come from where there's no structure. So I do think that helps also.
Thank you. Thank you. We do have our frequent flyers who like to come and just hang out in our office. And we welcome that if you want to come use our Wi-Fi and do your homework in our office, absolutely, 100%.
You do a good job.
Great. Well,
Thank you, Erica. Just want to thank Erica and Carrie for their efforts, putting these descriptions together and being here this afternoon. It's greatly appreciated. We are in the home stretch. We're getting close. We have only a few departments left. Museum, OSU Extension, and the Bowman Museum. And once we are done with that, I will be presenting to the board kind of a completed packet. And this will kind of be the beginning of a living document that will be reviewed on an annual basis, and it'll give us an opportunity to ensure we're focusing on services across the organization that we either need to for state or federal law, that board priorities may change, community needs may change. The living document will make sure we incorporate into our regular review process. So anyways, thanks again to Erica and Carrie for being here this afternoon. And I thank the board for their time. We're almost done.
Okay.
Everybody. for your
I'll
time.
call you when I
Also
get
big-
back, Jack.
Big shout out again to Brianna for
Yes.
no,
for doing all
thank you,
this.
Will. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Oh,
I
yeah.
would
The public, where are they? They need to comment.
entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
I second it.
Any discussion?
No discussion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.